Good evening, and welcome to a very special episode of Dream Sequence. Now, whether you come here for our devilish charm or innocent laughs, I'm sure that you've never expected horror from the likes of us. But tonight, that will change. I, Dannjolf, your host, will read you a tale of shock, terror, and lust. A story that fluctuates between fantasy and reality. Our story follows that of three high school students named Danny, with an I, Dan, and Christian, and their encounter with none other than the Slenderman. Admittedly, it's a boring story, so I'm just going to read you the best part. So that you're not completely in the dark, I'll give you a little bit of background on the story, and what led up to this magnificent scene that we have in store for you tonight. Dan and Christian are two angsty high school students dealing with the dramas of high school. And so they decide to get away for a weekend. And for some reason, their parents let them go camping at the state park unsupervised. And for some reason, the state park allowed them to go camping unsupervised. Dan and Christian find out about a party that's going on and quickly go and run into town for some supplies for this party. All the while, Dan is having weird paranoid visions of a tall, lanky man in a tuxedo. They go to the party, where somehow these kids got their hands on alcohol and drugs, and Dan and Christian party their asses off. But as they leave and go to retire to their campsite for the night, each with a different female companion, Dan has more visions of this tall man in a tuxedo, but he can no longer tell if they're visions. Enter Danny with an I, a friend of Christian and Dan's from high school, who is also out at the park for the weekend. She asks if they can join their fun and stay with them, and the guys reluctantly agree. Now, after a few more days of camping and other teenage bullshit, they find themselves in the woods, alone. Specifically, Danny is alone, because Dan and Christian abandoned her, for some reason. I scoffed as the boys left. How could they just leave me here in the woods, alone? They're probably just going to get laid by their whores, I muttered to myself as I began to walk towards the campsite. Ugh, boys. As I was walking, I heard a twig snap behind me. Turning around quickly, I scanned the tree line for any sign of movement. "Who's there?" I asked, scared. "Christian? Danny? Dan? This isn't funny." Another twig snapped behind me, and I spun around to see a tall man in a tuxedo. That wasn't the weird part, though. His arms were elongated to abnormal length, and he had no face. This was the legendary monster that Christian and Dan were talking about. Maybe it was just a man in a costume trying to scare campers. That was more likely. "Guys," I said, chuckling and rolling my eyes, "this isn't funny. The game's over." "Yes, the game's over." That voice was unlike anything I have ever heard. It was low, raspy, and snake-like. Even though the thing's mouth didn't move, I knew the sound had come from it. I began to back away from the thing, slowly at first, then more quickly, urgently. It was walking towards me, catching up to me with its long legs. Somehow I didn't seem to be showing any sign of urgency. Wait. Somehow it didn't seem to be showing any sign of urgency. Maybe it was just a joke. After all, a monster would want to devour a young girl in the woods quickly, right? It made a sound that was like hissing and laughter mixed. Was it laughing at me? Could it read my mind? A monster would want to devour a young girl in the woods in the most pleasurable way possible. What the hell? My face turned pale as it spoke that in that weird hissing voice. What was it talking about? Pleasurable? As I was busy thinking things through, I missed seeing a log and tripped over it backwards. I sat on my butt, supporting myself with my hands as the thing loomed over me. What are you?" I asked, not expecting it to answer. "You can call me Slendy." I gulped. So it was the Slender Man. What did he want with me? Duh, Danny. He was going to eat me, maim me, slaughter me. Something. I began to say my last goodbyes. Goodbyes to my family. Goodbyes to my friends. Goodbyes to my pets. Goodbyes to my classmates. Even goodbyes to those no-good assholes Christian and Dan. I hadn't noticed, but I'd begun to cry. Please don't kill me. Don't kill me. I'll do anything, I pleaded for my life pathetically. Normally, I wouldn't be caught dead begging. But when I found that my life was actually on the line, pride seemed unimportant. Slendy laughed again in that strange way of his and leaned over so our faces were mere inches apart. I swallowed hard. He spoke softly, like the equivalent of a whisper. Slenderman does not spare lives. Everything turned black as I fainted and collapsed on the forest floor. Now before we begin, I'd like to give you one final warning that the contents of this video are very NSFW, and you should not proceed unless you're 18 plus or your parents aren't watching. When I woke, I was in a clearing. Trees stood about 100 feet off in each direction, so thick that I couldn't see through them to the forest beyond. I desperately tried to remember what had happened, but memories came back in flashes. A piece of paper on a tree, the boys leaving me, a strange man? Slenderman. Shit, maybe it was all a dream, a fucked up sort of dream. Maybe after Dan and Christian left I fainted and ran into a tree branch or passed out or something. That's unlikely. The voice was right in my ear and I jumped, turning in the direction of the noise. There was no one there. Then, in the other ear came, "Over here, sweetie." I turned again and this time came face to face with the faceless monster. Despite my best efforts, I screamed loudly. I screamed so loud that I figured somebody might hear me, until the Slenderman did something unexpected. He grabbed my face and opened his seemingly non-existent mouth. The hole wasn't anything like a human mouth. It had rows and rows of sharp teeth, and its tongue was long and snake-like. Within the span of 2 seconds, the chasm was opened, and Slendy's long tongue forced its slimy way into my own mouth. I tried screaming again, but it was no use. The muscle took up all of the room in my mouth and began to cut off air supply. I kicked and punched at the monster, but nothing seemed to faze it. Before I realized it, I was forced onto my back. My wrists and ankles were strained with Slendy on top of me. The tongue continued slithering its way into my mouth and the throat, and I wondered if it would ever stop. I choked, and suddenly the muscle was gone. Taking deep gasps of air, I quickly surveyed the scene. Slenderman was standing over me. My arms and legs were still being held down, but by what? Then I saw them. 6 long, thick tentacles flowed out of the thing's back. 4 were holding my limbs down, and the other 2 rested horizontally at Slenderman's sides. Fuck. I was never really fond of tentacle porn, but I once heard that Christian was into it. Oh, if he could be here to see this. No. I couldn't let this thing have its way with me. Not with those gross tentacles especially. I squirmed my hardest, but the muscles were too strong. "Struggling will do nothing for you," came the voice. This time, Slendy didn't even try hiding his mouth as he spoke. He let his tongue and teeth show as his mouth opened abnormally wide. As soon as the words were spoken, I was lifted into the air by the tentacles. Letting out a scream, I kicked my legs and tried to break loose. I was being suspended maybe 10 feet off the ground by huge, inhuman tentacles, just the way I wanted to spend my break. He laughed again, almost mockingly. The 2 tentacles that weren't occupied began to slither their way up my legs and into my pants. I flailed, begging aloud not to make them do anything. They wrapped around the waist of my jeans and ripped them off. I blushed as my legs and Victoria's Secret panties showed. They continued up my torso, leaving slime trails as they went, and stopped at my breasts. "No, please don't do this. Please." The tentacles ripped my shirt off just as easily as my pants, and all I was wearing was my matching set of panties and bra. Even with no facial expressions, Slenderman seemed to be enjoying himself. His tongue hung out slightly opened mouth, and the grip that the tentacles had on my limbs tightened. "Now let's have some fun," he hissed. Each of the 2 tentacles took a different article of clothing from my body until I was completely naked. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to shut out the awful scenario. but my eyes flew open quickly as I felt something rub against me. Ah! Stop! What are you doing? The tip of one of the tentacles rubbed forcefully between my opened legs. Stop! I screamed. The other tentacle wrapped itself around my breast and was squeezing it while rubbing the nipple. This foreplay continued for quite a long time before both playful tentacles retracted. The four holding me flipped me over so I was facing the ground. Something like a tentacle, but different, was rubbing against me now. I looked back over my shoulder. Slenderman had lifted his long tongue up and was licking my virgin entrance. I moaned softly. I didn't want to, but it felt so good. I cried out as the tongue entered me and pushed against my walls. It was stretching me with its girth, and as it slid in and out and wiggled inside. After what seemed like an eternity, the muscle pulled out, accompanied with some blood. Oh, I was trying really hard not to break character, but the blood. What the fuck am I doing with my life? We've already come this far, and it only gets worse, guys. I saw out the corner of my eye that the tentacles reappeared, and I inwardly cursed. One took its previous spot on my tip, while the other shoved unexpectedly inside me. I screamed, closing my eyes tightly. The pain was unbearable, but it soon began to feel unbelievably good. I let out a loud moan as the tentacle went deeper inside me. Oh. It broke into my uterus, and I tried to scream again, but all that came out was a groan. I was slightly upset when the other tentacle left my breast, but was pleased when it shoved into my asshole. Why was I enjoying this? After you fainted, I bit you, Slenderman said. My poison makes everyone like my tentacles. The ass tentacle slammed in hard and fast, making it deeper each time. I could feel it in my stomach, and I began to cry out in pure pleasure. The two tentacles seemed to dance around each other inside of me, only stirring up more pleasure for their host. From the side, the two tentacles would easily be able to be seen, forcing my stomach out and creating a bulge. It was so rough and so amazing. But something went terribly wrong, for me at least. I'm sure it's exactly what Slenderman had planned all along. It didn't seem real. First, the tentacle in my vagina burst through the skin of my belly, wiggling out near my belly button. My gasps and moans of pleasure moderately ceased as I watched my own blood drip from the large hole in my midriff. Then the other tentacle burst through. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. All I could do was stare, mouth wide, at the rush of blood flowing from my body. The world began to spin, and the blood rushed from my head. I couldn't think. Was this real? No, it couldn't be. It was all a bad dream, and I would wake up from it soon. The pain was real, though, and I couldn't deny that. The last thing I heard before all the blood drained from my body, before I died, was the cruel hissing laughter of Slenderman and his breathy words. Your precious friends are next. And then Dan and Christian totally fucking forgot about Danny with an I for the rest of their lives, I guess. So yeah, Corpse Husband, Mr. Creepypasta, any of you guys you wanna collab, just hit me up, you know where to find me.